Good evening, and welcome on a cold December night here to Talk to Solomon. That's me, Stan Solomon. I'm the host.
I'm Chief Steve Davis, the co-host.
And our guest of honor is the one, the only, but never lonely, Larry Pratt, the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Good evening, Larry.
Good evening, gentlemen. Good to be with you.
Always a pleasure, sir. I must tell you, I had a conversation with a very bright lady today who has told me she has not slept in a number of days because she's worried that President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton are going to agree to acquiesce to sign on to a UN treaty, and they're going to come to her house and take her guns away. Could you address that issue?
The president might well sign the treaty, but that won't change anything. The treaty is still a nothing burger until it moves to the Senate, and the Senate finally might take action to approve it. That's not likely because 100 senators have already sent a letter to the president saying, we're not going to vote for that. Well, that's way over the number needed to kill it. You only need 34 votes and it's dead. So this is a problem that the president faces, and he can pursue it if he wishes, but I think it's just going to energize opposition to him, which is a good idea. I would encourage him to go ahead and do that. I've expressed before that my concern is more in the line that the president, having shown how lawless he's willing to be, doesn't care about the Constitution, doesn't care about the law, he could very easily tell gun stores who depend on him for his existence. We have this unconstitutional law in our country that requires gun stores to be federally licensed. And the president could arbitrarily and capriciously pull their licenses if they don't limit, say, the sales of handguns to anything, nothing above caliber .380, or no long guns that would accept a high-capacity magazine. That would be the Clinton gun ban, back again, on steroids. And sure, it could be taken to court, and I think it would ultimately be taken down by the courts, but he'll ultimately be out of office, too, in 4 years. My guess is he would be out of office before the courts finally disposed of the matter.
All right, well, let's go back to the idea of grabbing guns, confiscating guns, going to people's homes and demanding and searching for guns. Does the president, without the acquiescence of the Senate, have the ability, by executive order, by any other means or process, to do that to your knowledge?
The president doesn't have that authority. Now, again, we're talking about a man that's not apparently bound by limits on his authority, not in his mind. Then it becomes essential that we have local police and sheriffs who tell any federal officers that would be foolish enough to engage in that kind of behavior, not in this county, not in this city, not going to happen, or I'm going to have to make you a guest of the taxpayers.
All right, Chief.
Well, the talk about the sheriffs is very important. I spent most of my adult life working for a sheriff's department, 28 years to be exact. And during that time, I never worked for a sheriff that I thought really knew their full power that they had. But lately, I've realized that they have a lot more power than even I thought. And so I think that's a big significance between the sheriffs you mentioned, the police, because the police work for a chief of police that's appointed by a political mayor. The sheriffs are voted on directly by the people. So I think you'd have a quicker response by the sheriff's departments to protect people's rights than you would from police departments because of the political aspirations or the political doings and ongoings of the chief of police appointments.
I think you are absolutely correct, and that's why the election of sheriff is, in my opinion, increasingly of this opinion, it's more important than even who gets elected president. That's important, don't get me wrong, but a president like Mr. Obama can't do anything if he's blocked at the county level. Now, if you want to bring in the 82nd Airborne, perhaps. But so far, I don't think even Obama would like to operate with that set of optics.
All right, let me ask you, we just acknowledged and breathed a sigh of relief and hopefully celebrate the last bastion of you don't have any rights under the Constitution to have and bear arms. In Illinois, their appeals court has struck down Illinois' ban on concealed carry. Talk to us about that.
That was good as far as it went, and I think we should rejoice for the people of Illinois. My guess is it's almost certain to be appealed, and within that circuit, it's not a very good circuit constitutionally. The ruling might even be overturned. Posner is viewed, the fellow that wrote the opinion, is viewed as a conservative, but he didn't rule on constitutional grounds. It was more the sociology of guns and what's good policy and so forth. Well, shoot, most of the judges in that circuit would probably disagree with his views on good policy, and since the issue of Constitution really isn't on the table, we're a long way from where we need to be before the Illinois issue is disposed the right way.
Are we going to see this ultimately, in your opinion, reviewed by the Supreme Court?
Could well be. If there is an appeal, depending on the rules that are laid out by the court, we would probably want to file a friend of the court brief, an amicus brief, on behalf of the people of Illinois, but we would obviously take a very different tact than the one chosen so far by the good guys.
Chief?
Well, it's extremely important, but the thing that I see happening is that we have courts that are ruling against the Constitution. And so I remember Newt Gingrich talked about this a lot during his bid for president this last time around. And so we're going to have to also work on a mechanism that when the courts don't rule properly, a backup system that the people can get into a referendum or some other type of agenda where they can overrule these courts.
Well, and of course, one referendum is typically every 4 years when a sheriff is voted for. There's a couple of states that have unwisely pretty much done away with the powers of the sheriff. But in most states, the sheriff's the man. He's the top cop. And we could make his election if groups like Gun Owners of America, and pro-life groups, and pro-family groups, taxpayer groups, made the issue of the sheriff's election a gun issue, a pro-life issue, et cetera, down the line, because you could do that on the grounds that given the lawlessness in Washington, that sheriff is the one who, if he was of a mind, would be able to protect us from the lawlessness emanating from Washington. And I think we need to start asking sheriffs, will you move to interpose yourself and your deputies between lawless actions from Washington and we the people? Will you use Article 1, Section 8 as a guide for when you would not and when you would take action regarding federal intervention?
I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what should happen. And people, even like I said, a lot of sheriffs don't realize what power that they have, and their power comes directly from the people. They're voted on directly by the people. That's who they serve. That's who they're supposed to protect.
There's a Constitutional Peace Officers and Sheriff's Association headed up by former Sheriff Richard Mack, and he is having conferences. He's had 2 this year, and Lord willing, is going to have 1 or 2 more in 2013, where what we are talking about is laid out in some detail. And one of his very impressive faculty members is one of your own, the Elkhart County Sheriff, Brad Rogers, who I'm delighted to say is a GOA member. He acted in precisely the fashion we're talking about a year ago, almost to the day. Farmer approached him and said that the feds, the FDA to be precise, were hassling him over his production and sale of raw milk. And for whatever reason, the FDA just goes nuts over the idea that somebody would want to sell and buy raw milk. They know better than we, and they know that we shouldn't be consuming that or selling that. And so they told the farmer that if he didn't cease and desist, they were going to confiscate his equipment. Well, the farmer had pretty much exhausted his recourses. He was in court. They had a motion against him. So he went to see Sheriff Rogers, explained the situation. Sheriff went out to his farm, realized that they didn't have a thing on this guy. Not only were they constitutionally out of bounds because it's not one of the 17, 18 powers laid out in Article 1, Section 8, but the guy's farm was spotless. So what's the problem? So he notified the attorney in Washington that represented the worked for the FDA and said, if you guys put 1 foot on this guy's property, I'm arresting you. And the FDA attorney replied, well, if you try that, we're arresting you. And in so many words, Sheriff Rogers said, game on. And that has protected the farmer all this time. They have not taken any action, and I think they realize that, I don't know how many deputies the sheriff has up there. I should have asked him. I would guess perhaps no more than 150, but I would also be willing to bet that he's got 200-300 people that, were he to put out a call, would come running in, putting their right hands up and swearing to take an oath to become a sheriff's deputy and work with the sheriff for free, just the way Sheriff Arpaio in Arizona has over 1,000 deputies volunteering for him, patrolling the desert parts of the county around Phoenix. So this is something that I think has real promise, and it shows that there's a real 21st century use for what we used to call the militia. Whatever you want to call it the sheriff's posse. I know that there are people in a county such as Elkhart that will elect a sheriff like Brad Rogers. Believe me, there are plenty of people that would love to come with their gun, no cost to the taxpayer, and say, Sheriff, swear me in. What do you want me to do?
Well, there have been many a movie with that type of theme to it. Some were depicting real events, some fictional events. But the reality is, when I talked to the sheriff for whom Chief Steve worked, Jack Cotty, he was very open to the concept of people, and they actually had a program. It wasn't huge, but where people could come at their own expense, be trained. I was one of those people, so they know how the program works, and then be available when needed, if needed.
Right.
And I think that is the answer. In fact, that is the American way. All right, let me go.
Well, let me add one more thing.
All right.
Another one of our members is Sheriff in Eaton County, Michigan, Mike Raines, and he does something very much like what you're talking about. In Michigan, the sheriff is the authority that issues a concealed carry permit. When people come in to pick up that permit, they've already been vetted, obviously, and he invites them to just inscribe themselves in a list so that if there were a tornado or any other kind of disaster, man-made or not, would they be available? And so he's got a list of people he could just call, and immediately he could add to the deputy force that he's got there in Eaton County.
Well, that concept, of course, is the basis on which this country was built, because
Yes.
we've all seen the Westerns where the sheriff, one person, or maybe he had one deputy, or maybe he had two, at times of crisis, whether it's a man-made or natural crisis, he would call upon people, he would deputize those people, and it would be called a posse, and there'd be 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people that would be working under his direction to accomplish the objectives of the community, and that is the American way.
And in fact, as part of the history of the sheriff putting out a call, there was a time when it was called the hue and cry, and it was by law mandatory that one respond when the call went out, the hue and cry was made. One had to come with weapons in hand in order to help confront whatever the need was.
Because our country is built on the concept of a well-regulated militia, meaning private citizens being trained however they were trained in the use of, and of course everyone possessed firearms so they could be used to protect their community, their city, their state, and or their country, because we weren't even going to have a standing army except in times of war.
that was the concept, and it's notable that that was when the country developed the greatest amount of freedom, really, that any society has ever produced. And it was that we're talking about one of the main aspects of how it operated, how law and order, if you will, was maintained without over-reliance on a bureaucratic force that obviously, I think now, runs the threat, runs the risk of growing completely out of bounds. When you look at the large number of federal police agents, none of whom have any constitutional authority. Okay, maybe I have to back up. The Treasury Department does have authority over counterfeiting, and you might assign U.S. Marshals to acts of piracy and so forth. But outside of that, those strictly enumerated powers in the Constitution, all these other police agents that we pay, well over 100,000 in this country, all without constitutional authority. We're talking about the Department of Education has a SWAT team. You better pay those education loans, or you're going to hear that knock on the door and be surrounded by 60 guys ready to blow you off.
Well, likely because you didn't send your child to learn about homosexuality. All right, I want to move on to this young Marine, this 27-year-old ex-Marine or former Marine, being held chained to a bed in Mexico for possession of a disassembled BB gun type 60-year-old shotgun that was fully registered, and he informed, as he was told to do, as he was driving through Mexico on the way to Costa Rica. And his family was asked to pay a bribe. They didn't, so now he's still sitting in jail, and they're threatening to put him in jail for 12 years.
And he was actually following the what was told him by one of our own authorities as he was preparing to enter Mexico, saying, fill out this form and present it to them when you get there. And so, like a good Boy Scout, he presents the form to them, says, you know, this is, did I fill this out right for declaring that I have this shotgun? Boo! And then the rest is as you say, and he's been treated like a dog in a kennel, and somehow this is a grave offense. Of course, if he were a drug dealer, he'd have had an AK-47, and had any Mexican official tried to make anything of it, they would have been blown away. So you can see it's not unusual for police, when they're not really accountable and responsible to anybody, they're going to pick on the non-criminal as a way to stay safe and go home at night. Hey, dear, I caught one of those blankety-blank Yankees trying to smuggle a gun into the country tonight.
Well, the real question is, why is our government not standing up for this American citizen who has served his country?
And I don't think they are going to until we get a new president and somebody who's interested not only in protecting our citizens' right to keep and bear arms, but insisting on a little integrity from the Mexican government. I know that's asking a lot, but we have a lot of leverage with those Jaspers. We are giving them, unwisely, in my opinion, a lot of money in foreign aid. And it would be quite simple to say, hey, you know that next check that you've been counting on? Well, forget it as long as this guy stays in jail.
Would be nice. Chief?
Well, Larry made a good point here, but the worst part for me is how our government is treating this individual. And I know that, like you said, Stan, if he really wanted one, he could have got an AK-47 issued to him by our Attorney General. That would have been well and good to go down into Mexico and kill anybody that you want. But he's a serviceman. He's a military person, which Barack Obama hates.
He didn't know the pickup point there in southern Arizona where the Fast and Furious scandal was being worked. Poor guy. He just chose to enter at the wrong place.
Yeah, he tried to do it legally without, as Larry said earlier, without twisting the law like Barack Obama does. And so now he's going to sit in a jail for who knows, maybe 12 years or longer because he's made the mistake of trying to do the right thing.
Well, let's pray that that's not the case. But you did mention Fast and Furious. We have now seen a number of members of the ATF being demoted, fired, whatever. And, of course, nothing going up to Holder, who was in charge of this, or to Obama, who probably approved it. Is it over? Is it done? Where are we?
Well, I'm sure the president is acting on the basis that it's over. He's dealt with it, however, non-severely. I mean, these were people involved in a conspiracy to commit murder, and they're getting demoted or even fired. Oh, how draconian a punishment is that? Hey, it was only Mexicans, you know? That seems to be the message that's being sent. If the Republicans don't make an issue of this, the American people aren't going to half of them, I don't think, still have any idea what was going on. I think one of Romney's many messaging errors was not to talk about Fast and Furious and to have indignantly asked the president, how could your administration possibly have supplied guns to the Mexican cartel that resulted in at least 400 Mexicans being murdered along with 2 of our agents? What are you going to do about it, Mr. President? That would have been such an obvious gut punch, and Romney sat there with his hands folded like a choir boy. Cool.
Well, Romney was and is a choir boy. He's a good man, but the fact is, you don't beat evil with complacency or courtesy.
Right.
We
Right.
saw that in this union situation in Michigan, which I won't go into with you, but when you're dealing with thugs, you cannot go in with a wraparound smile and goodness in your heart. You're going to get hurt. And we lost an election we shouldn't have lost because we didn't choose to do what needed to be done.
Just one footnote on Michigan. We actually have a dog in that fight as gun owners of America, because those union bank accounts that are extracted forcibly from people working there in those municipal unions now, and other unions, go to anti-gun candidates almost without exception. To get a contribution from a union is almost a guarantee that you're going to try to come for my guns if you get elected. And so I'm very happy for this display of backbone in Michigan, because it means that, assuming they succeed, which it looks like they will, the unions now are going to lose another pot of forcibly extracted anti-gun campaign funding.
Great. That's great news.
I think it's a pot. I think it is an entire shipload, because there probably isn't another state outside of California or possibly New York where there's more money coming from unions, because money from across the country is channeled through the United Auto Workers, through Michigan. But if you cut off their water, and I think that there's a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. All right, let's talk about the elimination of conservatives from the Republican leadership and power positions. What's happening there?
Think 16. If we can get 16 members of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives to simply sit on their hands, John Boehner does not become Speaker of the House. The Constitution requires an absolute majority of the members of the House, and the Republican caucus is big enough that he'd have to lose 16 no-shows, if you will, before he's lost the election, and they might then turn to somebody else. It would take a lot of guts. I don't know if there are 16 Republicans that are up for doing that, but if they did, they could return the Republican Party to some truth in advertising, because right now John Boehner is going to continue to lose fights. He's like a paid fighter who's paid to be the guy that always goes down against the favorite, the white hat, whatever. And so he's old Black Bart, and he's quite comfortable playing his role as the continual loser. He has not, to my knowledge, I can't recall him winning one confrontation with Obama or anybody else in the other party. The only time he gets mad, like any other rhino, is against a fellow Republican who says, you know, I campaigned on this platform, and what you want me to do and how you want me to vote would mean I'd have to break my word. And so I can't do that. My word means more than that to me. That's why the 4 congressmen were purged from their committee assignments. And that's why it's so important that anybody with a Republican representative write to him or her and tell him, you're not serious about being a Republican, and I won't view you seriously as being a Republican unless you refuse to vote for John Boehner. We don't need a declared opponent at this point. We need 16 votes to go south.
Any chance that's going to happen?
If I were betting, I would bet against it, but there is a chance. There are people that probably do have the moxie, and I guess part of their assessment is going to be how close can we come to the needed number. If they think that that might happen, then I think they've got the guts to do it, but they probably don't want to be one of 4 or 5. They want to be one of at least 14 out of the 16.
So what's the peril of voting against John Boehner?
Not voting against, just not voting for.
Even for not voting.
Or not voting for, right? That, which
is it the lack of a committee assignment? Is it that
lack of committee assignment, lack of campaign support when you're running for re-election, and those are very tangible punishments, especially the re-election consideration. Now, there are some in Congress that I think are willing to do that, but I wouldn't send them out on the mission if I didn't think that we at least had some chance of success. I'd like to see at least 8 or 9 be willing to do that. There is a bit of strength in numbers, and the message needs to be sent that there is a disagreement over the very poor conduct of Mr. Boehner's leadership of the Republican caucus.
Well, I'm just going to say that if there's any congressmen that are afraid to do what's right and vote against him, worried about a re-election campaign or a committee assignment, they don't need to be in Congress at all anyway.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Some of them may elicit a primary challenge if they're not willing.
Hey, that's the way it goes.
Well, that's unfortunately
the way it should.
All right. At any rate, we're out of time. Larry Pratt, thanks so much for your great work. It's gunowners.org, folks. You want to go there, sign up, get your updates, as I've heard some of these things or see some of these things on the updates that I get on a regular basis. Larry, thank you for your great work.
Keep it up, Larry.
Guys, thank you. Really good to be with you. Appreciate this half hour. Thank you.
Bye-bye. We'll be right back with more. Major General Jerry Curry joins us here on Talk to Solomon.
I'm sick of politicians boohooing about, oh, we're not.
You have a computer, if you're alive today, which means you have a hard drive, which means it's going to break down. Mosey, the backup people, for thousands, for Stan, for thousands of people, for tens of thousands of people, is simply common sense. You go to cpnlive.com, click on the icon for Mosey, the backup people, and sign up. It's just a few dollars a month. Let me tell you something. We had a break-in. They stole our whole computer. You know what? When they take the computer, you can't recover anything, but we had Mosey. We had the backup. We were able to restore everything simply by buying another computer. cpnlive.com, click on the icon for Mosey, the backup people, and give yourself common sense, peace of mind, great value, the best thing you've ever done. Sooner or later, it's going to be Mosey, the backup people. I like to eat. Do you like to eat? We all do. And usually we run to the grocery store, we run to the convenience store, or we have something in the fridge. But power's been out in parts of this country in the last few weeks. We don't know what's going to come down the pike economically. Smart people are putting in food. Alpine Air Gourmet Reserves is a line of foods that you can put away that will last for a very long time. You know, they say eat what you store and store what you eat. This is great tasting stuff, healthy for you, a full line. You go to our website, cpnlive.com, and click on the button for Alpine Air Gourmet Reserves and see all the different things we have. This is good tasting food. It's reasonably priced. It will last. And it's worth its weight in gold if a problem arises. I know you don't think there's going to be anything that goes wrong. Actually, you do. This is smart. This is smart insurance. This is smart preparation. This is smart thinking. You have kids, you have a spouse, you have parents, you have dependents, you have an appetite. All those things can be addressed by a frugal but smart investment in Alpine Air Gourmet Reserves. Try them out. You will be tickled to death with the taste of them. You know what? In many cases, people start to eat this and they think, heck, this tastes better and costs less than what you're going to the grocery store to buy. CPNLive.com, check it out. Hey, my name is Stan Solomon, and you know if I have something to say, I'll say it. And I'll only tell you the truth because I'm a Republican, not a Democrat. Democrats always lie. Republicans only lie half the time. I don't lie at all. This is the Fuel Mule. It's an extraordinary product that was developed by a friend of mine, an engineer, and it increases the fuel mileage on your vehicle. If you have a combustion engine, this will increase your mileage by 10 to 20%. It bolts around your fuel line. You can install it yourself or have your mechanic do it. It is an extraordinary item, and it flat works. I've been using it for more than 10 years. It's increased my mileage on every vehicle I put it on, and by the way, it will last forever. You can get rid of your vehicle, just take it off and put it on the next one. Go to cpnlive.com. You'll have more information there. You can order it right there. We absolutely guarantee you'll be satisfied. The Fuel Mule. It's a way to kick down your cost of fuel and kick up your mileage. Don't you love the name? I thought of it. The Fuel Mule.